Okay, it seems not working. So last two classes we spent trying to understand the concepts of supply and demand, and to define supply and demand curves, starting from some more primitive principles such as marginal utility and marginal cost. And just to remind you that we, by and large, derive the concept of demand from marginal utility, and the concept of supply and the corresponding shape of the supply curve from the concept of marginal cost. So we've seen that the concept of utility is intimately connected to the concept of demand, and moreover, the demand itself is derivable directly from individual preferences underlying marginal utility, and that the marginal costs determine the concept of supply. Today, we're going to try and understand the process of coordination of supply and demand. This is one of the key problems in the whole of economic theory in general. How supply and demand come together to make market prices and market equilibrium. That's the key, another key concept. Market equilibrium. So you heard probably many times in your life that that's a supply and demand. That's a market is based on supply and demand. Everything is controlled and driven by supply and demand. Now we're going to try and understand more in detail how does that work in practice. So we're going to try and understand the concept of market equilibrium, as well as the concepts of temporary shortages and surpluses on the market. Shortages and surpluses. These are the different types of disequilibrium. So market equilibrium is a situation in which supply equals demand. Equality equilibrium. Disequilibria are the situations where there is a difference between supply and demand. And there are two types of disequilibrium: surplus and shortage. And we're going to try and understand how this whole system works, how supply and demand come together. So that's the game plan. That's the main thing that we have to learn today. In other words, the explanation of the entire economic process, how it works, how supply and demand work together to coordinate economic activity. This concept of coordination is a key. In your book, with good reasons, they emphasize heavily the concept of coordination. So we'll understand, we'll explain why is that concept so important in economics. We can begin. So this is a rather ambitious plan. Eventually, hopefully in an hour or so, we're going to come to certain conclusions. And hopefully you will be able to understand better how this works. But we're going to begin with a simple puzzle, with a simple story that I might have told you already during the first and second class. That at one level, at a simpler level, demonstrates the problem as well as the solution to the problem of economic coordination. That's the story of the pencil. The idea that nobody knows how to make a pencil. How is it possible? When you think of it for a moment, something as simple and ordinary as a common pencil cannot be made by any one individual in this world. I would even dare to say that there is no single person in this world who knows how to make pencil. There is not one person among us here who would have been able to produce a pencil on their own in 10 years if you don't have the cooperation of other people in the process. How is it possible? By the way, I don't know how to show you now the video. I will post the video on Canvas. Some of you, if you've taken courses with me before, might have seen this video. A video about the guy who wanted to make a toaster from scratch. He didn't want to buy a toaster in a store, and he wanted to make it himself. And he spent like 2 years trying to build a toaster from scratch, and eventually he failed. Now think for a moment, just you can apply it to any particular product. Pencil, pen, or toaster, or something as simple as a plastic bottle. What do you need to make a pencil? You need wood. That's the basic material. In order to get the wood which is usable for a pencil, you have first to grow a tree. You need land and seeds. You need then a chainsaw or an axe or some equipment made of steel to cut down the tree. In order to get the chainsaw, you need steel. In order to get steel, you need iron ore. In order to dig out iron ore, you need a very sophisticated and complicated machinery and equipment that has to be built up front many years in advance in order to dig out any quantity of iron ore. You need blast furnaces. Do you know how complicated technology of blast furnaces to melt iron ore to make iron? And how complicated the process from making what is the raw iron with more than 2% of carbon in it, which is not very good, to make steel. Steel is not just iron, it's iron plus nickel plus a very complicated combination of different elements and less than 1.7% of carbon. You know how complicated that process is. So you have to get all of that figured out and online and prepared and ready to go if you want to just cut down a single tree. If you don't have cooperation of other people who work independently from you, who make machinery and equipment for digging iron ore and blast furnaces, and who has a technological know-how how to make steel out of iron ore, you're lost. Then what else do you need? You need then to transport wood from the site where you grow the tree to the pencil factory, or probably not like the pencil factory, to some other factory that is going to be cutting down. So then you need the trucks or tractors or some other vehicles that have to be made. You then need rubber and steel and aluminum and a completely different set of technological skills that are necessary in order to do that. Can you do all of that alone? Find out all the natural minerals, materials that are necessary, acquire all necessary knowledge and know-how, and perform all of these production processes on your own. And this is just to make wooden part. What about graphite? How are you going to produce graphite, what we call wrongly lead, this middle part that actually writes? It is mostly grown in Malaysia and Indonesia and some parts of Asia. And they were imported then by an English merchant in the 18th century from South America. That's rubber tree, and the graphite is made. They're not even native to Asia. That's rubber main substance out of which rubber is made has been imported to Asia. You need a paint. Who's going to make a paint? How? Probably somebody else in the world. So you see how then, in order to produce something as simple as a pencil, actually you need a willing cooperation of thousands and millions of people who work in isolation without any knowledge about the existence of other people. And that's the meaning of this idea that nobody knows how to make a pencil. Everybody knows just a small part of the task. I cut down the tree. I don't have to worry about who is going to make steel. I'm going to buy a chainsaw. I'm transporting trees from the site to the factory. I don't have to worry about how my tires and my truck are made, and component parts of the engine are made. Somebody else, some mechanical engineer in India or in England or in America is going to worry about the technological details of that production process. So that's a puzzle, that's the basic fact of economic life, that everything is produced by a willing cooperation of millions of people who don't know about each other and who may not care about each other, who may hate one another if they knew about the existence of other people. One of my favorite examples is, imagine an iron ore miner in an iron ore somewhere in Ukraine or Russia, who is digging iron ore that will eventually is going to end up in a chainsaw that an American lumberjack is going to use to cut down the tree to make the pencils that you hold in your hands right now, students in North Dakota. If he knew who is going to eventually benefit from his labor, he might have resented the fact. He doesn't know it. He doesn't have any need to worry about, nor means of discovering who is eventually going to benefit from his work. Now, if that's the case, now the question is how this miracle happens. So we have millions of people who cooperate voluntarily, all of them somehow miraculously working towards the final goal to provide pencils for students in North Dakota. Who is giving the orders? How this coordination is happening? How they know what needs to be made in which quantities, by which technology, and so on. So solution to this puzzle is the theory that we will try to explain today. The price system and the forces of supply and demand. So imagine this production process. This is just part of the production process of a pencil. Here is the final demand. Imagine for a moment that the need for pencils in North Dakota or in America increased because you have the birth rate increased and you have more kids going to school than before. So now how is that going to be expressed in economic data? It will going to be expressed by increased demand for pencils. The increased demand for pencils will result in a higher price of pencils. There is a certain quantity of pencils being produced on the market. People want to buy more. That means that the price has to go up. So what is going to be the result of that? The demand for pencils increases, then the demand for wood will increase. Of course, because in order to make an additional pencil, you need an additional quantity of wood. Now, in order to cut down more trees, to make more, to create more wood, you need more equipment and machinery. If it's chainsaws, like the price of steel will increase. This change might not be large, but there will be a change. Increase. So then the labor of lumberjacks, the wages of people who cut down the trees will increase because of greater need for their services. So you see, none of these people who cut down trees, people who produce steels and chainsaws, lumberjack who use the chainsaws to cut down the trees, none of them need any explanation of why demand for their services increased. And probably they're not going to know why. The only thing that they need in order to serve our needs, to produce what we need, more pencils, is that they see the price of their services going up, they offer more labor, they produce more. Why people produce more when the price is higher? Basic supply curve, price quantity. Price 1, quantity 1. If price increases, quantity will increase. That's everything. Suppliers of goods, suppliers of resources that are necessary to use in order to produce an additional pencil. They don't need to know, and it's very important that they don't need to know about what is the particular reason for an increased demand for their services. And that's what allows this miracle to happen. People don't have to know anything, or almost anything, about the reasons why supply and demand change, or why price increase. The only thing that they need to know is what happens to price. You like when you're a cattle grower, you're a rancher, and the price of beef goes up. That's a good thing for you. You're probably thinking if you expect the price of beef to increase next year, you're probably going to increase your herd. You don't have to you're motivated by your profit-seeking motivation to provide this necessary, to satisfy this higher demand by producing it. Essentially, this price mechanism allows people to serve other people without caring at all about them and about knowing at all what is the exact need that they serve. Eventually, the exact need that you may be serving by increasing your what's called herd might be that Chinese are buying more beef on the market. And you may be a Trump voter who hates Chinese. But you don't have to worry about it. Maybe if you had known that the Chinese demand is higher, you might have had second thoughts. But the market mechanism protects you against that. You just know that somebody is going to come and to buy beef from you. And that's where your knowledge about the needs that you serve ends. So see, that's the deepest secret of how the price mechanism succeeds in serving consumers, and how the countless millions of people can cooperate together without anyone issuing orders and telling them what to do. There are no orders being issued. There are no bureaucratic and administrative and political decisions. There is just a price mechanism that motivates and prospects of a higher profit that motivate people to increase production, to decrease production, reacting to the changed conditions of demand. Okay, so that's a general overview of the problems. Any questions thus far? Remind me if I don't send you, remind me to post on Canvas this, or you can Google it yourself, how I made a toaster from scratch. It's an Irish guy who tried to do it. Any questions? Okay, so now let's go a step further. Now let's try and understand how supply and demand interact to create a market price. So thus far we took the market price as something that exists somehow miraculous. The price increases and decreases. Now let's try and understand how supply and demand interact and how they work together to determine market prices. So this is conventional demand curve, the downward sloping demand curve that shows different combinations. Imagine for a moment that we are now talking about the total market demand curve. So what is the difference between an individual demand curve and total market demand curve? Anyone remembers that?
Individual is basically individual quantities in the full industry.
Yeah, the individual demand curve shows the quantities that will be bought, that will be demanded by one individual, by one person, one demander. And the total market demand curve is all people together. At any given price, how many units of a certain good will be bought by the entire community. And let's say we have a supply curve of a certain product. Also the total market supply curve, so all companies together, how many units of a good they will produce at any given price. So now both demand curves and supply curves contain the arrays of these pairs of quantities and prices. So we know with demand at a higher price, there will be a lower quantity demanded. People will buy less when something is more expensive. People will buy more if the good is less expensive. If the supply is the other way around, as the price increases, companies, firms will be producing more and more. Now, the market equilibrium, or the market price of a certain product, is a point at which supply and demand are equal, or the point at which the supply and demand curves intersect, this point here. And this price here, at which quantity demanded equals quantity supplied, see, is called the equilibrium price. Because the equilibrium is a situation where supply equals demand, and at this point we have a price at which quantity supplied will be equal to quantity demanded. It is called the equilibrium price. This is the equilibrium price. One more thing. Anyone remembers the concept of consumer surplus? We discussed it. So we have the equilibrium price. That's a price at which everybody will be buying and selling on the market. So the equilibrium price of coffee is for a certain type of coffee drink that you pay is the price that everybody will be paying in the market. However you define market, local market. Now, that's a market price, but what is the maximum price that you would be willing to pay? That's called sometimes reservation price. Reservation price is when you're a buyer, that's the maximum price that you would be willing to pay for a cup of coffee. A cup of coffee is $3 and your maximum reservation price is $2. How many units are you going to buy? Your maximum buying price is 2. The market price that you have to pay if you want to acquire any one unit is $3. How many units you buy? 0, of course, because the market price is higher than your maximum buying price for you subjectively. Cup of coffee is worth maximum $2. If you have to pay $3, it's not worth it. How many? Can you tell me how many coffees are you going to buy if your maximum reservation price is 5? That's kind of a tricky question. Are you going to buy any units? Yes. Why? It's worth to you more than you have to pay. You have to pay $3 in order to acquire, but you were ready to pay 5. So you have $2 consumer surplus. We call this consumer surplus. That's the difference between your reservation price, maximum price that you're ready to pay, and the price that you actually pay. How about the second unit, the second coffee? Were you ready? Would you be ready to buy the second one if your reservation price for the first one was 5 and the price is 3?
Yeah, yes, because you like buying $6, you're ready for 10.
So the first cup is worth $5 to you. You buy a coffee because the price that you have to pay is 3, so you're good. You're $2 better off. But the second unit, remember marginal utility. What happens? The first unit is most valuable. You are ready to pay the highest price. The second unit is less valuable. Now, what is the maximum buying price for the second unit? The answer is we don't know. If your maximum reservation price for the second unit is 3.5, you're going to buy it. But if it's 2.5, you stop buying the first one. So you cannot predict in advance. If you buy one unit of a certain good, whether you're going to continue buying depends on whether your reservation price for the second unit will be higher than the market equilibrium price. If the second cup of coffee is worth to you just $1 or 50 cents, you're not going to buy the second. For most people, that's like, I would say, for most people, at any one particular moment, one cup of coffee is enough. But there are some exceptions there. Okay, so that's the first concept, consumer surplus. So that's whenever people buy anything, they derive from that consumer surplus. That's a benefit from the transaction. And this benefit is measured as a difference between the equilibrium price that they have to pay on the market and the maximum price that they're ready to pay for that particular product, for that particular unit of a product that they're buying. Vice versa. What is the reservation price for a seller? Now let's talk about the supply curve. So you have a maximum buying price as a buyer. As a seller, what would you expect a seller to have? Maximum selling price or minimum?
I guess they have the lowest.
Yeah, the minimum selling price. So reservation selling price. Is the price minimum? That's the minimum price beyond which you won't sell. What determines the minimum selling price? The maximum buying price is determined by marginal utility, by how much you value that particular unit as compared to what you have to sacrifice for it, $3, or other things that you could have bought for $3. What determines the minimum selling price? Last class discussed. Yeah, marginal cost of production. So now, if you can produce that particular unit for less than $2, and the market price is $2, you're going to sell it. Because you derive what is called producer surplus. Producer surplus is a difference between the market price that you can charge, between the equilibrium market price that you can charge from the market, and the marginal cost of producing that particular unit that you're selling. So if it costs you $1 to produce something, to produce this particular unit, this particular pen, and you can sell it for $2, you have a producer surplus of $2. Now, can you tell me, when you sell the first pen for $2, are you going to produce the second one? Are you going to produce and sell second one? It's analogous to the previous example with marginal utility and demand. Just apply the same principle. Are you going to produce the second one? Remember, marginal costs are increasing. It's cheapest to produce the first unit, and then it costs you more and more to produce further units. So the marginal cost of the second unit will be higher than the marginal cost of the first unit. By how much? We don't know. But if this marginal cost of the second unit is still smaller than the equilibrium price, you produce the second unit and sell it. You still have a producer surplus. Okay? If the marginal cost of the second unit is higher than $2, you don't produce because you don't want to waste resources. You don't want to be producing something that you cannot make profit of. Okay, so you see now concepts of consumer surplus and producer surplus are differences between the reservation prices of buyers and sellers and the existing equilibrium market price. Consumer surplus is a difference between the maximum buying price that the customer is ready to pay and the actual equilibrium price that the customer pays, whereas the producer surplus is the difference between the minimum selling price at which a producer can afford to sell a given unit and the actual market price that he can charge, that market can bear. Now look now, having all this in mind, look at the supply and demand curves. And now tell me, this is the equilibrium price. If people exchange whatever, let's say this is 25 units of a good will be exchanged at $5 each piece. Which people, which suppliers and which demanders will be exchanging goods here? Look at the demand curve and the supply curve. At this equilibrium price, will somebody is here on the demand curve, whose minimum buying price is three and a half. Is he going to participate in the market? No. So this entire part of the demand curve down here, where nobody is ready to pay $5 for a single unit of a product, they're outside of the market. Those are people who are not, whose maximum buying prices are lower than $5. So being rational human beings, they abstain from purchasing this product at $5. So they're outside of the market. So only this part of the demand curve, people whose maximum buying prices are higher than $5, only they will be participating in the market. So they will get the opportunity to buy 25 units from suppliers. So see, these people around here, they are called the more competitive buyers. More competitive buyers are people who are ready to pay more. Less competitive buyers are people who are ready to pay less. Can you now finish the analysis? How to apply this to suppliers? Which part of the supply curve is out of the market, and which part of the supply curve participates in the market? And what is the hallmark of competitiveness on this side of sellers? Anyone? Sorry, can you be louder? So which part of this lower? Yeah, left side. Here. Or here. Left here.
Yeah.
This part. So why?
Because they would be willing to sell that price.
Yeah. So their minimum selling prices are lower than $5. So these are low cost producers. These are the people who can afford to sell at prices that are lower than $5. These people in this upper part of the supply curve, they cannot afford to sell a single unit at $5, so they are outside of the market. they're not going to be wasting resources. You see how market rationalizes the use of scarce resources. It doesn't allow people who don't have a strong preference for something to buy, and it doesn't allow people who are not very good in making stuff to waste resources to produce stuff. It allows only those people who are most efficient in producing stuff with lowest marginal cost to produce, to engage in trade. So eventually these people here and these people here, they will be making exchanges. Most competitive buyers and most competitive sellers. Most competitive buyers are people with the strongest preference for a good, ready to pay the highest price. And most competitive sellers are people with lowest marginal costs, capable of producing at lowest cost. So in this particular market, this part of the supply curve and this part of the demand curve will be making exchanges. And this will be the equilibrium price. So see, now we can say that we derived essentially the concept of market equilibrium price from individual preferences. So you don't know anything, you don't need anything else. So marginal utility, demand is determined by marginal utility, supply is determined by marginal cost. Marginal cost is again determined by preferences that people have for different things. Remember the production possibilities curve. And eventually the equilibrium price is just the intersection where supply and demand come together. So what is the market equilibrium? Market equilibrium is a situation in which supply equals demand and where the people's preferences are constant. So you shouldn't think about market equilibrium as some permanent state of affairs. It's typically a temporary and short-lived phenomenon. That's a situation where nobody does anything, or that everybody does the same thing that they used to do before. You're producing 5 units, you just keep producing 5 units. You want to buy 3 units, you keep buying 3 units in the same intervals for the same amount of money. If we imagine for a moment that everyone among us is frozen in our current preferences and our income is frozen and we just keep doing the same thing as we did before. That's one funny economist, Ludwig von Mises, he called the concept of equilibrium like an evenly rotating economy. It's like a Groundhog's Day. Every new day is exactly the same as the previous one, and we just keep repeating the same thing that we did before. So that's the concept of market equilibrium. Economic system that functions in the situations in which nothing changes. Preferences do not change, technology doesn't change. The way how we produce things remain the same. So that's it. So now you can imagine that you can figure out very quickly that this concept in the real world would not describe the long-term development. So equilibrium of any kind of rather temporary. So whenever you decide to buy something new or to decrease your purchases of something in order to increase the purchases of something else, or whenever a new technological invention is introduced, when anything substantially new happens, that this equilibrium is created. And now, what then happens? This is interesting. So this equilibrium could mean 2 things. This is the equilibrium price. Let's say that the price, for whatever reason, increased. Price of a given product. So that's a disequilibrium. So this is the new high price. What happens with the supply and demand? So in the equilibrium, quantity supplied will equal quantity demand, of course. And this type of disequilibrium, when price is higher than the true equilibrium price, for whatever reason, on the market, the price increased. If price is higher than the equilibrium price, then quantity supply will start increasing. Why? Quantity supply is increasing because we are moving along a given supply curve from point 1 to point 2. And as we do so, with an increase in price, quantity supply increases. That's the basic law of supply. Now, less efficient, higher cost firms enter the market. The low cost firms increase their production because their marginal costs go down. Now they can afford to produce more. What happens with the demand as price goes up? Yeah, it goes down. Because now, let's say that this is $5, now price is $10, and $9, doesn't matter. So here we went from only people who can produce at less than $5 to everybody who can produce any number of units at price lower than 9. So this entire price range between 5 and 9 and the cost range between 5 and 9 is now economically viable. That's how price increases. On the demand side, now it used to be that everybody with the maximum buying price higher than 5 can participate in the market. Now people with the maximum buying prices for various units in the range between 5 and 9 are out of the picture. You have to pay $9 and your reservation price is 7, you're out of the market. So the demand, quantity demand will shrink. By some people reducing their purchases from 5 to 3, depending on their marginal utility schedule. Some people completely stopping purchases, but the quantity demanded will shrink. So then the quantity supplied will tend to be higher than quantity demand. So what's going to happen next if supply and demand schedules haven't changed? So what is this called when supply is greater than demand? This type of disequilibrium. Yeah, surplus. Or glut. Surplus. So now, what's going to happen here if the supply and demand schedules haven't changed? What's going to happen and why? Now, this is very instructive. What's going to happen to the price once people realize that there are surpluses being created? Yeah, the price will have to go down. Why the price will have to go down?
There's a lot of something and the price is high, no one's gonna buy it.
Yeah, the price is a result of market exchanges interactions between the two sides. And like in every other negotiation, the side who holds better cards will have better terms. Whoever gets a better negotiating position will derive better terms from the deal. Now, who is in a better negotiating position with a surplus here? Buyers. Because these people produced stuff and they cannot sell. They cannot sell all of it at a given price. There's not enough people who want to buy. So this difference between quantity supplied and quantity demand is that you cannot sell it. So you already pay the cost to produce something. You employ people, you spend electricity on electricity bill, water bills, you bought raw materials. You already have sunk cost. You already invested, and now you cannot sell. You can derive zero. At a given price, if you were to insist on $9 per unit, you will get $0 of revenue. So now you're in an inferior position. So you have now to compete against your fellow sellers by lowering the price in order to lure the reluctant buyers to enter the market once again. So now the two processes will start happening at the same time. As the price starts inching down from $9 to 8.5 to 8 to 7.5, usually this process is very brief. We're going to extend it just for analytical purposes. We're going to pretend that it will take a while until this process of re-equilibration happens. So what happens with the supply and what happens with the demand? Let's say that you go to $8. Now this entire range of the supply curve between 8 and 9 is out of the picture. These highest cost sellers are out of the market. They cannot afford to sell. If your minimum cost, marginal cost is 8.5 and the market price is 8, you cannot afford to produce. This entire range of the supply curve is reduced, so the quantity supplied will start decreasing. At the same time, as the price goes down, new buyers will enter the market, or the old buyers will increase their purchases because now the market price has dropped. So the quantity demanded will start slowly converging to the equilibrium level. And this process will continue on until we go back to the point of equilibrium. So this process is called market clearing. Market clearing. Market clearing is simply the process of prompt and quick elimination of surpluses and shortages on the market. If you don't have government interventions, any disturbance, any disequilibrium, any departure of the real market price from the true equilibrium price that equals supply and demand will be strictly temporary. Market is usually very efficient and very ruthless in eliminating surpluses and shortages. Exactly through this process of renegotiation among the suppliers and buyers and sellers. So that's market clearing. So the same thing will happen if price departs from the equilibrium level downward for whatever reason. So now can you tell me what's gonna happen? What the situation will be with the downward departure of prices when price is lower than the equilibrium level? Anyone want to try?
The demand is going to be high, while the supply is going to be low.
Quantity demanded will be higher than quantity supply. So what is that?
Basically, we'll have something other than surplus, so
That's shortage. There is not enough stuff. So more people want to buy than there is stuff around. So how is this then re-equilibrated? What's going on? What the market does in order to eliminate the shortage? Who is now in a better negotiating position? You have the same two types of agents, buyers and sellers. Who is now better off?
supply.
Yeah, sellers. Sellers are now so now they want better terms for themselves. What are better terms for them? Higher price. So as price starts inching up, because sellers have a better negotiating position, they can blackmail. Look over here. We have a limit. We have 5 chocolate cakes, and there is 25 of you. You're ready to pay only $3. If you don't give us 5, 6, 7, we're not gonna sell it. That's the simple mechanism. Of course, you don't have to say that. In most markets, people discover this in more indirect fashion, but that's the process essentially. Now, price starts inching up. Some people jump in right away. They say $4, I'm buying. The price starts inching up. As the price starts inching up, what happens to the supply? Increases. Now people will produce more chocolate cakes. Oh wow, these people are paying $4 and $5 or $6. Okay, I can make some money. At $3 I couldn't make money because it cost me $4 to produce a second chocolate cake, for example. Now I'm gonna jump in and produce the second, maybe the third. We'll see, depending on my marginal cost for the second and third units. Some firms that were not producing at all chocolate cakes will now start producing the first unit or the second unit. So the supply starts inching up. What happens to the demand when price goes up? Less competitive buyers drop out. People with maximum buying price of $4 drop out when the price goes to $5. So a similar process of convergence of quantities demanded and supply happens, and eventually market clears. You don't need any government edict, any government administrative intervention, any type of regulation or political masterminding, just the selfish motivations and negotiations between buyers and sellers will very quickly dispose of any shortage or a surplus and re-equilibrate the market. And then in the equilibrium, the market will produce exactly the quantity that people want to buy at a given price. So one thing that we can now derive from this is that there is a process of harmonious relationship between the buyers and sellers, in a certain sense. And that there is a competition between buyers and between sellers, mutual. So buyers compete by bidding up prices, sellers compete by lowering prices. So now this is a process that works for every particular good that exists on the market. And this type of analysis is called the partial equilibrium analysis. Partial equilibrium. Why partial? Because we talk only about one product or one sector, and we disregard other things. We disregard, for example, how the production of chocolate cakes affects production of ice cream and other things that are connected. So we just look at the supply and demand for one product or one isolated segment of the market. That's a partial equilibrium in one given isolated segment of the market. There is a far more complicated theory of general equilibrium, how all things fit together, how the equilibrium in all markets is simultaneously maintained. That's a very interesting story in and of itself. I may not give you now because a proper exposition of that requires some very fancy schmancy mathematics, but the basic concept is very simple. So what is the general equilibrium? I'll tell you one thing, for example, one hallmark of a general equilibrium is that profit rates in all industries tend to be equal, or they tend to converge towards an equal value. So what do you think? Why is that the case? So when that happens, when the profit rate in all industries is the same, or roughly the same, we say everything is in equilibrium. Chocolate producing, pencil making, car making, hospitality industry, education, all kinds of private businesses, the profit rates tend to converge towards a single value. Why is that the case? What do you think? That's a general equilibrium. Imagine for a moment that that's not the case. Imagine that 3% is an average profit rate in all industries and 5% in IT. Okay. What's going to happen as a consequence of that? What do you think? What is capital market? So what's going to happen on the capital market? People buy stocks and bonds, people invest market for financial capital. People decide when people buy stocks and bonds, they decide where to invest. You buy stocks for pharmaceutical company, you're providing new capital for pharmaceuticals industry. Now imagine what's going to happen on the capital market if the profit rates in pharmaceutical industries are 2 times higher than the average profit rate in an economy. Anyone trades on the stock market? Anyone buys stocks or bonds? Nobody. So people buy stocks and bonds all the time. They speculate about future prices and future profit rates. If you are an investor and you hold stocks in a company that has only 50% profit rate than some other company, it is very likely that you're going to sell your stock in this company A and buy stocks in pharmaceuticals. So you will have, if a profit rate in one branch of industry is systematically higher than in other branches, there will be a shift, there will be a redistribution of capital from other industries to that particular industry. So now, as the supply of something increases, another concept now that you will want, this is the equilibrium price. This is the equilibrium quantity. Supply of something increases. If one more thing, if a company has a higher profit rate, that means that they can charge systematically higher prices than their costs. If you move capital goods, if people sell off their stocks in steel industry and IT industry and move it over to the pharmaceuticals, that means that the supply of capital will increase. The supply of capital increases, then what happens to the prices? The prices will go down, the profit rates will go down. That means that it will go back towards equilibrium. In all other branches of industry, the opposite thing will happen. The supply will move to the left. The supply of capital will decrease because people will sell stocks. That means that the price will go slightly higher, and they will converge then to the same equilibrium level. So this ability of people to move capital goods between different branches of industries reduces the profit rate spread. And to the extent that they can freely move capital from one branch of industry to the other, the profit rate will tend towards equality. And the entire system will be in a general equilibrium. So systematically in a general equilibrium, you cannot earn much money just by moving your capital from one industry to another. In the long run, at least. Okay, so that's just one thing that I wanted you to bear in mind, that the concept of partial, that most of what we are doing and what we will be doing systematically with the supply and demand analysis pertains to this partial equilibrium analysis. You pick one industry and then let's see what happens here, supply, demand, prices, and so on. But the more complicated problem is the general equilibrium. How all the demand curves for particular products all fit together in one complete system. Okay, what else? Is there anything else? Is there any question that you might have before we adjourn? Oh, we have 10 minutes left. Let's see if there is anything that I here. But this appendix that I didn't want to bother you with, on page 109 in this particular chapter. You can take a look at it, and maybe I will introduce it later on when we talk about money and monetary system, monetary policy. For now, you can ignore it. Just one more thing, because we have a few minutes left. One kind of basic conclusion from all this, and pertains to the problem of knowledge in economics. So one of the key functions of market prices and one of the key benefits of allowing supply and demand to coordinate freely in economic activity is that this process allows us to discover a knowledge about what is the best way of producing things and what is the best way of satisfying human needs, and kind of knowledge that we wouldn't have had in the absence of market prices. So there is this epistemological, you can call it, aspect to the market process. This idea that competitive process and market prices discover for us certain knowledge that we, by us, I mean society as a whole, that we couldn't have had otherwise. So who can figure out, imagine how many ingenious ways of producing new things people invent every day. And then ask yourselves how many of these things would be discoverable if we didn't have market prices to send the signals. Market prices are actually signals to people what they can or cannot do, should or should not do. So one example that I think I mentioned before, just take this one example in order to see what is the tremendous gain in knowledge, useful knowledge that we derive from market prices. You know that the best electrical conductor, the material that conducts the electricity best, is silver. How do we know? Why don't we use silver for electrical wires? It's better, it's much better than copper. Copper is very good, but it's not nearly as good as silver. Because it costs much more. So we know that silver should be used for electrical conduction. A type of knowledge that we would have forsaken in the absence of market prices, with very negative consequences for satisfying the needs of other people who need the services of silver, including your laptops actually that contain silver. So who could have known that silver is much more valuable as a part of a laptop than as a part of an electrical wire? In the absence of market prices, that tells you, no, this is, people are ready to pay for silver as a part of a laptop much way more than they're ready to pay for electrical wires. So this trade-off between the scarcity and technological superiority is a very fine and complicated problem that cannot be solved simply by the means of any other mechanism than market price. As an engineer, you have no way of gauging whether silver or copper is a more economical way of building electrical installations. So without market prices, you cannot discover that knowledge that is necessary, which is not some kind of theoretical knowledge. It is very nice to have. It's a vitally important knowledge for satisfying concrete, tangible human needs. And we say that something is costly, that means that it hurts other people. Yeah, you're gonna satisfy one particular group of people and one particular group of human needs to have cheaper electricity. Not cheaper electricity, by more easily conductible electricity. But you're going to sacrifice many other needs about which you may not know anything. But any other employment of silver that is viable, that is alternative to electrical conduction, you simply have no way of discovering these alternative uses. Another aspect, another type of knowledge that is encouraged by market prices is innovation. So how is innovation encouraged by market prices? Price of something increases, that's an incentive for somebody else to invent a substitute and to sell it to the market. What is a substitute? Substitute is a good that can serve equally good or roughly equally good as something else in satisfying the same needs. So technological invention wouldn't have been as efficient and as vital if we didn't have a way of discovering how can we personally benefit from an invention. The benefit from invention in an area in which you have a very cheap product is far less than in an area in which the product price is very high or increased. Let's say oil. Let's imagine now that oil is now cheap. Environmentalists are kind of bitching about everybody using oil and so on. We don't have enough alternatives. The simple reason for that is that oil is dirt cheap. There's very few incentives for people, rational utility maximizers, businessmen, businesswomen, to experiment with non-fossil fuel production ways of securing energy. If the price of oil increased to $150 per barrel overnight, you can bet your bottom dollar that many other things will become very heavily invested in. And not the type of things that are now political boondoggles like wind farms and solar energy, but really efficient alternatives that can secure the energy needs, like whatever, nuclear energy, fusion, many other things that we cannot think of right now that people will be motivated to develop. So you cannot discover whether there is a need. You cannot satisfy the needs for technological invention if you have no way of discovering whether there is a profit opportunity. And the only way of discovering this is prices. Another, and this is the final thing for today, what prices allow us to do is actually to conserve resources. That means it is not very likely that we are going to run out of oil overnight. Why is that the case? Because if the global supply of oil starts significantly shrinking, this will be reflected well ahead of time, well before the point of what is the term, the exhaustion. In higher prices. Higher prices means that the substitutes will become much more attractive and that people will start economizing on oil, consuming oil. Not because they're concerned about the global supply of oil, but because they're concerned about their family budget. So you see that the conservation of resources is aided by the existence of market prices, because the market price is a signal to people whether something is relatively scarce or not. When it gets scarcer, people reduce their purchases for selfish reasons. So, whatever conservation laws we pass, there is no better protection for privately owned resources. That's an important proviso. For privately owned resources in the market price. Okay, any final question? Right hand. No. Okay. Have a nice weekend, and I'll see you on Tuesday.